only around 40% of Africa's population is connected to the internet. That's opposed to other continents such as Europe at nearly 90%. But the potential Africa holds is immense. And one of the aspects that will be explored over the next 3 days at the Africa Tech Festival in Cape Town is what that potential really is. The Minister for Communications and Digital Technology, Mondli Gungubele, invited the industry to partner with and invest in Africa. Major investments in fibre optic cabling, cheaper data and connectivity in especially rural areas are among the important goals set in motion by government. Gungubele says wider and better access to technology has the potential to contribute greatly to South Africa and the rest of the continent's GDP. SABC News reporter Mariska Botha joins us live at the Africa Tech Festival. Mariska, no surprises that the Communications Minister Mondli Gungubele would have spent quite a bit of time talking about bridging that digital divide between the haves and the have-nots, right?
Absolutely, you're 100% correct, and I heard you telling us there about how the ISC is preparing a lot of technology involved in that as well. And as South Africa is also gearing towards the fourth industrial revolution, well, we're in it right now, trying to get on track with the rest of the world, that digital divide becomes ever more important. And to bridge that gap, as you said there, 40% connectivity across the continent of Africa, but it has the youngest population in the world. So that aspect is very important, and to get more people access to that all-important technology that's out there, being able to learn, being able to connect, being able to communicate around the world, because that's where we're going to. To chat to us a little bit more about what all of this means, we have the event organizer, Mr. James Williams of Informatech. James, thank you so very much for your time. Put us in the loop. What is Tech Week all about?
So Africa Tech Week is essentially about bringing together all the different ecosystems from all the different countries and all the different leaders from across African technology. We have two sides of the show. We have Africa Com, looking at broadband connectivity and the built network. And we have Africa Tech, looking at how that connectivity is connecting businesses and enterprises on the continent.
So what does it look like on the continent in terms of making or having access to that kind of technology?
So this year in particular has been a tough one for Africa. It's probably about 50% down on investment levels from last year. But our view, and personally my view, is that is part of the macro landscape, part of the broader economy. And essentially for us, a big bet on the continent is that the next decade will be that of the emerging market. And Africa in particular, through its youth, through its global partnerships, through the improving governance, is incredibly well placed to be that primary emerging market.
How does that happen? How do countries ensure that development takes place?
So there's no single answer, as always with these things, so it's many things. It's global partnerships, like I mentioned, it's better policy, it's investment is a huge one, and not just the amount of investment. You know, I mentioned how investment is down this year, but it's also where it's being invested and the strategies of how that's being spent. We just had a talk on exactly that, and hopefully events like this help as well to converge the ecosystem. We have about 60% South African audience, but the rest is either from the continent or the wider world. So it's about bringing people together, and that's our job. Connecting, educating, and celebrating as well. We have lots of social features throughout the week too.
So what can people expect to do and see here?
So we've got two global exhibitions on those two sides of the shows that I mentioned. People from across the continent, global brands, tech leaders, right through to kind of engineers and practitioners of the technology. There's the exhibition. At the same time, we have content that reflects those exhibitions. So we have content on the connectivity side, all around affordable internet, and we have sessions on the Africa Tech side, which is those disruptive technologies, your AIs, your 5Gs, all those things, data centers that people keep talking about. The third pillar of the event that we're building is the startup side. Hugely important for the event and reflected in that for the wider continent. So over there'll be pitch competitions, there's startup competitions, an investor lounge, hackathon, all those things kicking off. It's the coolest place to be. It's the coolest part of the show. People with their trainers, with their suits, you know, those kind of guys, not like me.
Yeah. And the face of technology is changing, of course. As you mentioned there, the youth playing an ever-increasing and more important role, not so?
Yeah, hugely important. And as I say, investment is certainly down, but nothing in the ecosystem looks any worse than it has in previous years. It's actually improving. It's just that the wider economy, often companies, the first thing they pull out of or hedge their bets on is emerging markets. So Africa's suffered from that. There's wider issues to talk about. Should the continent be relying so much on foreign investment, which you want to build, more continental investment, and then we're also building partnerships as well. So through the Investor Lounge, we actually want to be a place where business is done. Not just a nice collection, nice sessions and some lunch. People want to do business, and hopefully across the next week, conversations all around the event happening like that.
You said investment was down, but what is the feeling? You're from Europe yourself.
Yep.
You deal in the tech industry. What is the feeling about investment in Africa? You said the next decade belongs to Africa.
Yep.
So what is the feeling from elsewhere in the world about investing in Africa, and to what end?
So it's a very good question, and it's something I personally am very passionate about, and something we spend a lot of time for this event. For me, the most critical factor in that investment is the image of the continent. And I spoke about it earlier at a different event this week, but if you ask your man in London, you ask your man in Paris or the States, what's the image of Africa? They're going to have a very, very different image and a very different answer to you and I, because we know people in tech and we work in technology. People think, you might not care about the man on the street, but in boardrooms around the world, and for international companies as well, for tech brands and international governments, that's how they make their investments. How does Africa look? Is it risky? Is there corruption? Is there infrastructure ready for us to build on? Is there a workforce? And for all the answers for Africa, it's a yes. It's the youngest workforce. Everybody talks about it constantly, but skill in those is critically important. The global partnerships, the investment from governments on domestic infrastructure as well. So all the parameters are there. Just need to deliver on those. And something I mentioned in my kind of opening is that there's no promise that that's going to happen. And if it doesn't happen in the next 10 years, and we're still talking about potential, what a shame. What a shame that would be, because you're talking about those 300 million people that are being added to the workforce instead being in low-skilled jobs or poverty, or that's what we're talking about. You're talking about people's lives and the ability to change it through tech.
So coming back to South Africa, what does South Africa look like? So,
first of all, Cape Town is one of my favorite cities, one of the most beautiful cities in the world. It's literally my favorite trip of the year. There are four big economies, four big tech ecosystems that everybody talks about when they talk about Africa. They'll look at South Africa first, they'll look at Egypt in North Africa, and then they'll look at Nigeria in West, and then they'll look at Kenya in East Africa. For varying reasons, but those are the leaders at the moment. And then in South Africa, at the moment, it's a lot of people talk about connectivity, but taking a step back from that, without sustainable energy, without sustainable water and utilities, there's no connectivity anyway. So South Africa, I think, definitely it's in a fantastic position, and kind of applaud the government for a lot of the steps that they're taking. But these changes and these challenges take decades. So I think there needs to be lots of commitment on the core infrastructure of the country. But the startups ecosystem is incredible. You go to Joburg, global business is there. So it's about potential and about meeting that potential and growing the country and the continent. One thing I think is that there's a big area for improvement for the whole continent, not just South Africa, but South Africa would really benefit is continental partnerships. Is the AfCFTA that was launched 4 years ago that we're still kind of trundling along trying to get use cases from. Not just because a Nigerian can spend his naira in Kenya or Ethiopia, but also for the image of the continent, going back to that image of unity, being able to travel across the continent and trade. It seems crazy that some countries have money that can't leave the ecosystem. You can't spend your money, and really on that front, and one really important one for South Africa is interoperability. Being able to spend, being able to trade across the continent, something similar to what Europe has with the EU, where there's kind of free trade across. So super important as well.
And that will become ever more increasing with technology as well, because the world is moving online, not so. We're all going to live in the cloud one day.
Exactly, yeah. Cloud's a big focus for us. And again, South Africa is a genuine leader in the cloud and the data center space. Has anything from 80 to 90% of the white space. That's changing as other countries catch up. But that's a real area for South Africa to continue to lead, is in the cloud space. You look at AWS, they have an innovation center 100 yards from here. You have Google, you have other giants launching on the continent. So it's an amazing ecosystem.
And what would you say, in your view, if you could have a projection for the next 10 years? You're very optimistic about Africa. What would that look like for you if that development and investment is made?
So the kind of the two core things that I would love to see are those that I've mentioned, and there is a risk that talking about them so much people become desensitized. But when you look at the numbers of the skills and of the investment gap, then it's obvious to anybody the importance of that and why people talk about it so much. By 2050, Africa will have 38 of the 40 youngest countries on Earth. The median age will be under 25, and there'll be 1 billion people in the workforce. Now, if you look at what's happening in China, and they were for many, many years and still are the factory for the world, Africans might not want that, but look what it did for China. And that's what you're talking about, 1 billion people in the workforce. And if they're not trained, not skilled, they don't have access to global markets, all you're talking about is those people either falling into poverty or being left behind in the connectivity. The second one on infrastructure, 90% of Africa's infrastructure spend is from foreign investment, either companies or foreign governments. That has to change as well, whereby domestic countries spend a few percent of their GDP on infrastructure. That naturally has to change. And again, going back to the point around global partnerships, it should be not just at the benefit of global brands, the priority should be on connectivity and infrastructure for Africans. Like just before the interview, we were talking about that 40%. For all the plaudits over the last 10, 20 years, you still under 50% of people have access to affordable, sustainable internet. And that has to be the basis, energy and internet.
Thank you very, very much. James Williams speaking to us. He sneaked out of the convention center where he's the moderator to chat to us about these all-important issues. Like he said there, only 40% of the African continent has reliable and secure internet connectivity. And even in South Africa, the minister said 69% of all people that access the internet do so through their mobile devices, and therefore there is investment, great investments to the tune of billions in fibre connectivity, laying cables under the sea into rural areas. That's an area that especially the South African government is focusing on, getting rural areas connected and making sure that people have cheaper, accessible data to get to the internet, to be able to use it to its full potential.